there was such a ridiculous situation that Whoopi Goldberg and I, the View stalwart Whoopi Goldberg and I, have ended up on the same side of an issue. And it has to do with all of this ridiculous censorship of books. Rewriting, basically, for those of you out there who'd missed this story, is going on what seems to be quite commonly.
I would just like to drop this thought out there for millions of people across the country. I think Whoopi needs to invite you on The View, Clay. I think it needs to happen. I'll be in the audience. I'll be cheering you on. Be great TV.
I think they still require their audience to wear masks, but I would love to go on The View as a guest. I think I would be incredible theater. I would definitely get booed. It would be riveting. But they started with, did I pronounce his name? Roald Dahl, who wrote Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Matilda, James and the Giant Peach. Probably a good chance that either you or your kids or grandkids have read these books over the last 40 or so years, 50 years, as they have been wildly popular for many children. And they've decided to replace offensive, and offensive is in quotation marks, language throughout his children's books. Sometimes if a kid is fat, they're now referred to as enormous, would be an example. Even the books that some of these kids are reading.
I'd rather be called fat than enormous. You know, enormous is like super fat, to be fair.
Yeah.
And roly-poly is condescending. No one wants to be called roly-poly.
Also, like Augustus Gloop, I think, was that German kid's name, if I remember correctly. His weight is a big part of what happens to him, spoiler alert, as he goes through the chocolate factory.
This is why he's like, Mommy, I need the chocolate river, all of it in my mouth at one time, or else, oh no, I fell in the chocolate river and I float because of my buoyancy.
Yes, this is a very good accent. A fat kid is unable, as you might expect, to restrain himself inside of a chocolate factory. A bit of a bull with a towel kind of situation. He's being taunted.
What is your weakness? Like, what is you don't smoke. I don't think you drink. But like, what is your? I bring it up just because like I think I might have an addiction to chocolate, which my wife could now confirm. Like, I just eat little
really
bits of chocolate.
You think would be like, it's a fantastic question. Probably that I am I'm overconfident. Like I just think that I can do things that I can't. You know,
I meant more like food and substances. But okay, that's cool too. That works.
Oh, well, I thought you were going deep into the psychology there.
No.
I could eat chicken parm for every meal.
Okay.
I could
eat you could eat enough chicken parm that you're
eating.
Disgusted at yourself afterwards with how much chicken parm you've eaten.
It's hard for me to stop eating cobbler or pecan pie. Like I could just go to town on those. It's hard for me to put an ending to it.
So back to the chubby German kid and Roald Dahl.
Roald Dahl, chubby German kid, they are changing the language in this kid's books. And we know this has already happened with Dr. Seuss, where they even took a step further and said, oh my goodness, there's a drawing or there's a plot point or there's a page where people are out there and they're saying these books can no longer be published. Well, they're now doing it to the James Bond books, which were written by Ian Fleming. I think, Buck, these books would have come out in the early 1960s. I think I am correct. The first ever James Bond book by Ian Fleming would have been written in like 1960, something like that. Does that sound right?
Yeah, Ian Fleming is fascinating in that he was a part of, I believe, British naval intelligence in the Second World War. So he was a guy writing really the greatest spy novel franchise of all time as somebody who had worked as, it's interesting, we're not supposed to call it, the spy is the person who works for the intelligence officer, just so everyone knows. So you don't usually refer to yourself as a spy if you are in the CIA or MI6. The people that are bringing you the information are the spies. And another thing to always keep in mind, if anyone ever tells you they were a CIA agent, Clay, be very suspicious, because anybody who's ever worked in the agency knows it is CIA officer. But Ian Fleming, I hate when they do TV and they call me a former CIA agent. I'm like, now it sounds like, this was something I made up to impress ladies at bars, which, by the way, let me tell you, they're not impressed. They're like, wait, you work for the government? How much money do you make? They'd much rather hear you're a professional sports player. And I would also say that Ian Fleming was part of Operation Mincemeat, I believe, which they actually made a movie of it, which was the landing of the floating of a body with fake invasion plans off the coast of Spain. He was part of that in actuality. Anyway, sorry, but I think Ian Fleming's a fascinating guy.
Yeah, well, I wanted to make sure I got this right. The first James Bond book was published in 1953, Casino Royale. It appears he published about 12 of them. Obviously, those then have turned into iconic movies that continue to have a great deal of power to this day. But I read some of these books when I was a kid because I was a James Bond guy, and I was like, these are super cool and interesting. And, as you read a book that was written in the 1950s or the 1960s, anything by modern sensibilities is going to sound different. So they are now editing them based on race and sexism-related issues, And, Buck, to her credit, Whoopi Goldberg on The View has come out and ripped this idea. Listen.
Look, y'all got to stop this, okay? Just put a disclaimer on it that says, listen, this book was written at this time, or put out the original and what y'all have done, because kids should have the right to read how people thought so that they know how to make the change. But, they tried to do this with Mark Twain as well because they were so concerned that the N-word was in the book. Well, that's how they did it. That's what it was. We don't want people doing it today, and you don't see it as much.
I feel like James Carville in Old School when he's like on the debate stage and goes, that was perfect. I have no response. She's totally right. Yeah.
She nailed it. I mean, I think she even used the same example as I did on the show when we talked about Dahl's books being edited. Huckleberry Finn, you need to see the totality of that work. And here's what I would suggest. I mean, not that my books have any sign of great historical legacy or anything, but as an author, I find the idea that after I'm dead, somebody can go in and change the words that I published in my book to be awful. If I'm dead, it's a little bit more challenging if the existing author, some people got upset, Buck, with George Lucas because he went back in and altered some of his Star Wars movies, right? Added different scenes, did different things that he wished he had included. And if the author, creator is still alive, I'm a bit more, open to the idea of, hey, this is my work and I've decided I want to revise it. I don't like it because I think the work should stand for itself because it's a representation of the time and era in which it was created. And if you come back 30 or 40 years later and alter it, I don't like that personally. But I'm at least open to the idea if the creator of the work decides that he or she wants to amend it in some way. But the idea that you change an author's works after he or she is dead is like you should be able to sign something that keeps that from ever occurring.
Well, we can think about times in history and modesty movements with regard to art and the fig leaves and making sure that we weren't showing any exposed breasts or with statues or paintings. And you think about these movements of the past, and you think, well, that's an overreaction. That shouldn't be done. That's what they're doing right now.
Yes.
We look historically at points in time when they were saying, oh, we need to cover up all those Greco-Roman statues because of the ladies' boobs, Clay.
Yes.
As we know, we can always believe.
Nobody defends them more than me.
We can always believe in. And we realize that that's so silly, and yet here we are, just with a slightly different framework, doing the same thing. I mean, as others have pointed out, I think it's an obvious point, so I'll make it as well. What happens to Shakespeare? I mean, honestly. Now, I think that there are a lot of people on the left who, Shakespeare is a little tough. They'd have to actually get in and understand some of the stuff. But they know that there's things in there that are politically incorrect, things in there that would be considered problematic. So are we going to start editing Shakespeare? I mean, this is where does this end? When the Soviets did this kind of stuff, when they were suppressing art and theater and literature, we said, oh, how horrible it is. And it was. But somehow the left in this country, which thinks of itself as the place for creativity and for the creative class, they have become the little commissars. They're all there. Now, to her credit, Whoopi Goldberg, for example, is standing up saying this is crazy. And she's right. And she deserves the applause she got from the audience on that one. But so many on the left, Clay, I mean, she's not going to stop them. This is going to continue.
I wonder, didn't Whoopi Goldberg appear in The Color Purple? Wasn't that one like a movie that she was in, based the novel?
I'd have to check.
We'll look it up in the break. Yeah, she was. And the reason why I bring that up is that novel was considered very controversial. I believe it was by Alice Walker. And Whoopi, to her credit, may recognize that the idea, there are scenes in that novel that are very problematic, right? They're tough sometimes for teenage kids to read. That doesn't mean they shouldn't read it, right? And there's a difference. And we talked about this on the show, and I think it's an important one. There's also a difference between changing the language in a book and deciding what's appropriate for a kid to read, right? And I think there's a big difference there, and oftentimes it gets ignored or isn't recognized, and that's an important part of this distinction here.